Nothing's What It Seems by Imani Hakima.
Nothing's what it seems, yeah. Terrorism strikes again. Usual suspect gets the blame. Responsibility is claimed, but nothing's what it seems. There's not a scrap of proof around. Instigator can't be found. None of us is safe and sound, 'cause nothing's what it seems. Yeah, nothing's what it seems to me, or what it may appear to be. This is my reality, and nothing's what it seems.
Good evening, Resistors. Today is July 19th, 2011, and you are tuned in to the WideShut webcast on Resistance Radio with me, Keelan, Balderson. That's wideshut.co.uk and resistradio.com. Now, we've got a very important show today on the topic of the July 7th, 2005 London bombings that, of course, saw 56 deaths, including 4 alleged suicide bombers. A lot of you will be familiar with my research mapping the history of Western governments and how they've manipulated extremist Islam over the decades, and also the anomalies from the day itself on 7/7. So far, we haven't had too many quote-unquote whistleblowers. We have had the likes of MI5's David Shayler, who did go a bit nuts, and also Annie Michon has come out and questioned the official story. But we have another person from within the establishment coming out today with some of those same questions. I covered the basics of the story last week. You can read the article on the website. Former police intelligence analyst sacked for calling 7/7 a monstrous lie. And that article has been going viral all over the internet. Pretty much one of my most read articles so far on the website. So people are really interested to hear what Tony Farrell has to say. Just to give you a brief background, Mr. Farrell has served as the Principal Intelligence Analyst for South Yorkshire Police since 1998, but has unfortunately had to leave that position because, like many of you listening now, he also came to the conclusion that Muslim terrorists are not the only threat, and in fact might be pawns of the New World Order agenda and their expansion into the Middle East, as I cover quite extensively in my film 7/7 The Big Picture, and will be readdressing in the new film 7/7 Terrorism or Treason. But enough of my rambling, let's get to the man himself. Tony Farrell, welcome to the WideShut webcast.
Thank you, Keelan, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be on.
No worries. It's always good to start from the beginning. So it's 2010. You're tasked with your yearly strategic threat assessment for South Yorkshire Police. Just talk people through what exactly your job as an analyst entails, what that assessment is, how you compile the data, and why this time you decided you were going to think a little bit different, a little bit outside of what you're expected to do.
Okay, Keelan. Yes, I was Principal Intelligence Analyst for South Yorkshire Police. So South Yorkshire Police is a reasonably large-sized police force. I think it's ranked 11th in the size of 43 police forces in England and Wales. And each police force has a Principal Intelligence Analyst, and they are normally head of profession for a range of intelligence analysts that might cover neighbourhood policing to major incidents and intelligence analysis on organised crime. We also have intelligence analysts on to do with special branch that would look at terrorism. I myself didn't look directly at terrorism. I had responsibility for pulling together a number of analytical products as head of profession for South Yorkshire Police's analysts, and we had 45 analysts in total. So that's a little bit of an overview. We did have some annual products to deliver, a control strategy for the police force we'd recommend to the Chief Constable, and we'd also do strategic assessments. And in this instance, what the key product for me and the assignment was a strategic threat risk assessment matrix. And that was simply a simplified version of a strategic threat assessment. And a threat assessment would cover a multitude of sins, ranging from, at the extreme, terrorism to low-level antisocial behaviour affecting local communities that potentially could cause problems to the force's reputation. So it's a wide range of things that we'd look at here. And I'd be responsible for pulling that annual product together for the police force.
So, how free are you to do your own research? Are you allowed to go beyond what they give you to do, or?
Well, the remit is for a threat assessment, is to look at the threats that could harm the community, harm the police force, their reputation, be a threat to individual life, or the economy. So it's a wide-ranging remit where we pull in a multitude of data sources, many of which will be our own internal police information systems. But we were also encouraged through the training that we are given as intelligence analysts to look at open source information. And in this instance, it was the open source information rather than anything I learned internally that led me to the conclusion that the terror threat as articulated by our government and followed through and implemented by police forces in England and Wales wasn't actually correct, and that open source information was beginning to challenge that. Right. So that I got my information from open source by and large.
So how did you first stumble across some of the alternative information that we'll get to in a minute?
Well, home interest really, Keelan. I had an interest in church history. I had an interest in the New World Order and geopolitics. So it was coming from a home study that I began to have a deeper understanding of what was going on in the world. And this enlightenment, so to speak, was coinciding with the assignment deadline. So whilst at work, I was happily going along at this stage, as it normally would, with not anticipating any single problem about completing a threat assessment that wouldn't be to the satisfaction of my management. And this was the situation right up until about a week before the assignment was due. And the assignment was due on the 8th of July 2010. So I wasn't anticipating any problems, but I had researched the history of the church. I'm a Christian, so I was into Bible end time prophecy. I was also looking at history right from the origins of the church all the way through to current times. And using the internet as open source material, I was getting an awful lot of information. But it was only a week before the assignment was due that 9/11 material came in front of me. And that shocked me to the core, and I delved further on that in the hope that, no, this can't be true, surely not. Let's see what I can do to find something that would reassure me that the notion of an inside job, for instance, was simply not the case, and I could refute it. But try as I might, I couldn't find anything, and the more I delved, the worse it got. So that left me in a bit of a state of shock when I was going into work, knowing that looming was a threat assessment that I had to do, and that was causing me problems. And I was thinking, in the week leading up, I was wondering, what on earth do I do here? If 9/11 was an inside job and it wasn't Islamic terrorists, and it was largely a plan orchestrated by the George Bush administration to justify war and a foreign policy agenda in the Middle East, then I was having problems with the notion of completing a threat assessment that would assume that it was Islamic terrorism as the major threat that would have to go along with the government narrative. But even then, it didn't dawn on me to check out 7/7.
I believe you mentioned your Christianity. I believe you said it was your minister that prompted you to look into it.
Well, it was one morning at work. I was in work thinking about 9/11 and thinking about, and at this time I was looking at the threat assessment, knowing that I had to deliver on it. When obviously I'm torn here, so I just take a break for half an hour and over lunchtime and go and see the local minister in Sheffield, just to have a quick chat. And it was he who when I mentioned I'm in a bit of spot of trouble here, I feel outraged about 9/11, and I'm being forced. Well, not, I'm in a difficult situation whereby my position is compromised. If I go along with the government narrative, I'd be potentially telling a lie because I no longer believe the government narrative. But he said, "Well, what about 7/7? Is that the case?" And I suddenly shot back in my chair. I thought, well, I better check that out. Now, I still had about five days to go before the deadline. So that weekend, I spent all weekend looking at 7/7. So the various video footage of the ludicrous diversion, the early videos, including your 7/7 ripple effect. I watched them all twice over, and I read the Home Office accounts, and I tried to research as much as I possibly could.
So did your minister, was he just giving you a bit of advice, or had he himself looked into some of this?
I don't believe he had. He was just curious. He was shocked when I came to him about 9/11. It hadn't dawned on him. So, but he was a bright minister. So he simply said, "Oh well, have you tried? If 9/11's that, what about 7/7? Might that not be the case too?"
So,
see, and that hadn't clicked with me. Even when I was looking at 9/11, I simply couldn't believe that our country's government, could actually do such a thing, as commit false flag terror, and have murdered their own people, to justify a foreign policy agenda. So I was at that stage. Really, it was a massive shock, and then obviously. Equally a big shock when my conclusions were such that 7/7 was an inside job too. But then I was out in a situation where there was only 2 days to go before the deadline.
So you went and did this homework about the London bombings and 9/11 and stuff. As you say, you went through the official reports, saw the anomalies and contradictions and whatnot.
Yes.
And the various films. What are some of the things on 7/7 that made you sort of stop and say, hang on a minute, they're not telling me the truth here? What is it that got that ball rolling?
Right. Well, the fact that there was no inquiry as to who committed the crimes. Tony Blair said that would be a ludicrous diversion immediately after the bombings. And instead we've been told who is guilty very early on, and we have instead a diversionary inquiry about intelligence failures, but also the poor quality and anonymity behind the official version of the London bombings. That really isn't a document that holds up for a Home Office document. Normally Home Office documents set a good standard, but the standard of the Home Office anonymous version was so poor. It contained lies. It contained all sorts of anomalies. So that was serious, I thought, when everything was hinging on that Home Office document.
Yeah, the first document, they get the train time wrong. So I mean, how much faith can you really put in it?
Yeah, and for the government really to give us one narrative of 7/7, and simply not allow any competing narratives, and there were competing narratives such as your own, to be officially aired in the process, I think is a bit of an insult to the nation. But there were very interesting things in the early documentaries. Certainly, I think highly significant would be Peter Power, Advisor Consultants, and the mock terror exercise that he run. Now, I wouldn't underestimate the importance of that. Not least because in statistical terms, that terror drill, which was simulating terror incidents going off at the very same locations as actually did occur, in statistical terms, it as certain can be that such a drill exercise matching those at same locations and dates and times could not have occurred by mere coincidence. The statistical chance of that happening by coincidence is so remote that you can forget it. It's certain that there must have been some link in some way or another. Now the problem then becomes, why haven't we investigated that? Peter Power was on record as saying there was 1,000 staff at first on that terror drill exercise.
Well, I interpret the Peter Power thing a little differently than some of the other researchers out there. I've personally not actually found any hard evidence that Power's exercise was anything more than, in an office-based environment talking to people. I think it's been people go to his words when he was on the day itself, when he was on the news, and he was saying, working with a company of over 1,000 people. I think people have taken those words and created the idea that there was a physical drill with actors running around London and stuff like that. I've not found any evidence to support that. That doesn't make it any less important that Power somehow picked the same tube stations that actually occurred on that day with the attacks. But what it tells me is that within the security establishment itself, there was some kind of knowledge that this may or was going to happen. Else, why would he have been able to choose such an accurate scenario if it wasn't on the cards?
My point would be that just because you haven't found any evidence, they may not wish to. They may wish to suppress any potential evidence. My point was that really because of the statistical improbability of it being a coincidence, this had to be investigated formally. No matter how accurate he was when he first said 1,000 staff, whichever is the truth, whether it was a handful of staff or 1,000, it is a fact.
I think what it meant was the company had 1,000 staff, but he was working with the crisis management people within that company.
And we sat everybody down in the city, 1,000 people involved in the whole organisation, but the crisis team. And
I absolutely agree that he definitely needs investigating, and that it's a giant coincidence. But I just come at it from a slightly different angle, because he wasn't actually the only one. Since 2003, they've been doing drills on the underground. In 2003, there was a full-blown simulation. And then in 2005, a few months before the bombings, there was a joint drill with America called Atlantic Blue that again envisaged attacks on the underground. And then recently came out, I think it was around the time of the inquest, just a couple of days before the attacks on July 2nd, the Metropolitan Police were running an exercise envisaging attacks on 3 tube stations as well. So it is clear that there was intelligence floating around that this was on the cards, and there were warnings from Saudi Arabia and France and even Israel. So yeah, he definitely needs investigating. I just don't quite jump to the point that he was running some kind of drill on the ground with actors and whatnot. But right. Yeah, I definitely agree that he needs some investigating.
And notwithstanding the fact that he was they were doing something very similar in 2004 that was there for all to see on the Panorama programme, where Peter Power was on that along with Michael Portillo, running through very similar circumstances as to what happened on the day. They weren't exactly the same stations on this occasion, but I have to beg to differ on this. I think it's hugely significant that these were the same locations that happened. And this was a mock terror drill that he said. So that to morph into the real thing is so deeply suspicious. And I think it's just unacceptable. And we can't brush it aside saying there's been other terrorist drills. I think this was so significant that it demanded an investigation, and an investigation has never occurred. So I simply do not accept that it isn't hugely significant to what has really happened. And quite frankly, if they had nothing to hide, why didn't they be open and transparent about that to its fullest extent? Instead of what we've had is different stories coming out from Peter Power at various stages, and a reluctance to allow any data to come out. Some data has been prized out, but the whole thing, Keelan, is totally unsatisfactory. That's what I'm saying. In the light of the fact
I absolutely
inquest.
agree. I mean, this guy is totally suspicious. I just don't see the evidence for the drill being on the ground, but I do see that there was definitely some kind of talk within the security services that this kind of attack was on the cards, and for whatever reason they chose not to, prevent it when it actually happened, or it's at least suspicious that they didn't.
And although it doesn't conclude one way or other in itself, but when we look at the wider things that have gone wrong, there are just simply too many clues, too many problems with the whole thing, that collectively, whilst we may not be able to make the inferences as to exactly how this was happened, exactly how it was pulled off, there's so many problems in it all that it's safe to conclude that it occurred nothing like the government narrative suggested it did.
Exactly.
And for that to be the case is totally unacceptable, especially when we hide behind a recent inquiry by Lady Justice Hallett that simply allowed evidence to be presented but not allow evidence to be challenged. And even today we still haven't had a proper inquiry as to who actually did this. We've just had to assume it based on the Home Office narrative. So in a wider sense, I still think it's all unsatisfactory.
Yeah, I think we can all agree what didn't happen, and that was what the government first said happened. So we're on the same page, more or less. But yeah, personally, I like to steer clear from promoting any particular alternative narrative because, as you say, we're not aware of all the information. The nature of the intelligence agencies means we don't have all the facts and figures because they're not transparent about it. So we can definitely say the government version is wrong and contradictory and missing certain facts. But
where we might have to differ there is that I wouldn't underestimate the importance of that fact. Why should the government's version be so ludicrous? That's the problem with it. The lack of trust in the government's version, of course, in so many areas, is a serious problem in itself. And therefore, if you can't trust the government on this, then it undermines what they're saying on threat, especially if we could look as well at 9/11, where the case for an inside job is even more compelling and virtually nailed. Then it all adds deeply to the suspicion that this 7/7 wasn't done, as Tony Blair said, in the name of Islam, but was done rather as a false flag operation to blame Islam to justify a foreign policy agenda in the Middle East, in Afghanistan and Iraq, that is immoral and unjust, and within that under false colours. And I'm afraid the country needs to wake up to that because I believe it's evil, and something needs to be said. It's no good trying to forever chase what exactly has happened at 7/7, what exactly has happened at 9/11, when really we can stand back and look at it and say it's obvious that the government have told monstrous lies on both counts, and that is serious. And when we look at our foreign policy agenda, we have simply got no right, I don't believe, to be acting the way we are in those countries. So it all points strategically, and bear in mind I was asked to do a strategic threat, to something which certainly I was confident enough in my own conscience to say I can't actually put anything down on paper that I believe would countenance the perpetuation of a lie, that lie being that the main threat to UK citizens from terrorism comes from Islamic terrorists. I think it came from internal tyranny. Now, can I say that with certainty? No. But on balance of probability, it's more likely to be internal tyranny than it is to be Islamic terrorism, I'm afraid. And that's a sad thing to have to say, but I felt I'd reached that conclusion on the 8th of July 2010. In the time of being off from work since dismissal, nothing unfortunately, has reassured me that I was wrong. In fact, the more I've looked, the more I feel as though I was justified to make the stance, and the worse it gets, the more I look, I'm afraid.
Absolutely, and you mentioned the inquest briefly a few moments ago, and people listening here may listen to me and Tony and think, well, they don't represent the people that were involved on those attacks, but the victim family members themselves have been critical of the recent inquest since day one. The barrister came out and said, look, there was significant intelligence known about two of the alleged bombers that could have been utilised to prevent the attacks, so we want MI5 under further scrutiny. But what they got was an anonymous agent hidden behind a screen denying everything, and then MI5 refuses to take on any of the recommendations. So what was even the point of the inquest? Even if you believe the official story 100%, the inquest was still an epic failure, and in many ways it's raised more questions. It turns out that they don't even know what explosives were used, but right after the attacks they come out and say, oh well, military explosives, high-grade military explosives. Then they changed the story to homemade explosives. Now they say they didn't even take swabs from the blast sites. So, it's a continually changing story. When we discover one thing, they try and plug it up with something else, and they're just chasing their tails, because it's quite clear that the official story is full of holes.
I think the greatest mistake that they've made, the government here, in holding that inquest is that the exhibits that have come out, some of those exhibits look at the train carriages where everybody's seated. And I want to draw people's attention to some excellent analysis that Nick Colostrom has done on that. Because his point was that, yes, these exhibits were made available from the inquest, say, where everybody was positioned on the train, looking at the witness statements, where the bombs were detonated and made in the train, and detailed analysis. And I haven't done that detailed analysis, but I have watched a program where Nick Colostrom was analysing that in great detail. And yet again we have implausible stories, and this is coming from exhibits that have come from that inquest that are now in the public domain. So there's a useful piece of research and analysis to do there that again is able to discredit the government version of things, and it brings into question the fact that was that inquest corrupt too. And
well, I believe that they even used computer models. I mean, if you don't know the data going in, you don't know the data going out. They just obviously put in what they wanted to get out.
That's right. So we have serious problems. There's no getting away from this. I think the time has finished where we have to sort of give the government the benefit of the doubt. The time has come where we have to demand answers, because quite frankly, we are in a terrible mess here. It seems to me quite obvious that not only have they lied, but this has been a false flag operation. I honestly believe that the 4 alleged bombers were set up as patsies as part of a wider training drill. I believe that the most plausible explanation was that at least 2 of them were actually assassinated at Canary Wharf. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. I mean, but there has been some academic study. Here in Sheffield, we've got a paper by Dr. Rory Ridley Duff that has examined all the evidence surrounding the reports at Canary Wharf after the bombings had occurred. And he's weighed up, tested the theory of the 7/7 ripple effect hypothesis that they were killed at Canary Wharf against the conspiracy files, that's the Home Office BBC version of events, and has come to the conclusion that the 7/7 ripple effect did not fabricate any evidence and is far more plausible than the official versions that the government run by. So that adds weight to the fact that there may well be something in the fact that there could have been assassinations from Canary Wharf, and that is far more plausible than the current version we're expected to swallow from the government. Well, I can't swallow it any longer. I couldn't swallow it any longer a year ago. I certainly couldn't swallow it now.
Well, I definitely think the whole Canary Wharf thing needs, well, I say needs more investigation, but whether we'll ever get a proper investigation anyway, I don't know. But there was no doubt there was news reports of shootings. One problem I do see is that there was no eyewitnesses of the shootings themselves. There was a lot of commotion, people told to stay in their offices and things like that. But there was definitely something going on at Canary Wharf. What that is, I don't know for a fact.
And we'll probably never know.
No.
But the problem is I think trust has been destroyed. It's certainly my trust in the government was destroyed sufficiently to feel compelled to make the stance, knowing full well that this is going to land me in great trouble. I'll lose, likely, in all probability, just by sticking my head above the parapet. It could easily lead to job loss. It subsequently did. The consequences of not just job loss and you would be it could seriously harm my finances and everything I'd worked for. And that's more or less what's happened at the moment. I've lost everything. But I'm not concerned about that. I wouldn't have changed things. I wouldn't have done anything different, even though that's happened to me. Because I think it's time that people stand up for the truth. Certainly within the police service, you have to question why it was necessary to dismiss a principal analyst who genuinely believed that the threat was something else, was coming to management with a red alert under management's control. I wasn't wild here. This was all fully under the control of management. I was just flagging up a problem, saying, look, we have a major problem here. Can we have a look at it? Can I have some time just to this has all come so soon. Can I put together what I've found in a strategic threat just for your consideration? Rather than force me to go down to an intelligence strategy management board, knowing that in my own mind I'd have to lie if it was to comply with your request. So that was the dilemma I was in, and their own professional standards for honesty and integrity would suggest that it would be a sackable offence for me to give out misleading analysis. So I was in a no-win situation here. I was damned if I went ahead with it, in a sense, and I was damned if I didn't. But what ruled me was my conscience. I simply couldn't lie, not when so much is at stake. And when I'm talking so much, we're talking not just the people who died tragically on the 7th of July 2005, but we're also talking about the people who lost their lives in 9/11, but also have lost their lives both our own soldiers and the innocent people in Afghanistan and Iraq who, through no fault of their own, have been subjected to Western foreign policy agenda that's killed many people.
And
now,
of course,
I
remember the I don't remember, but I've since then found the big BBC report from Tony Blair, New World Order coming to the Middle East. And then we get 1 million dead Iraqis, and all this stuff that's come since then. We've got to ask ourselves: is this a new world order we want to live under, where these kind of things happen?
Well, it's certainly not. And the ascent of the new world order is not coming in by democratic means. It's coming in by stealth. Whatever we define the new world order is, and it's exceptionally complex. The one thing it's underpinned is a complex, a mind-blowingly complex web of secret societies that are running the show. And it starts with a third of it is probably the European Union, and where British people getting a vote for the European Union implementation of law again that sort of dominates our sovereign law in the United Kingdom. So we're giving all our powers away here without being given an opportunity to vote on it. And that concerns me greatly, especially when you understand, if you understand in a wider sense what really is behind it, which is another story altogether.
Well, it's on record now that leaked documents from one of the 50s Bilderberg meetings, where they admit that they wanted to implement first a economic community, but we've got to arrive at the most integrated system in the shortest amount of time. So secret societies. The Bilderbergers admit to creating the euro. So you're not wrong.
It's almost like, and I've mentioned in my various reports, was that the movement's satanic, and I make no apologies for that, because most of what's underpinning it, this complex web of secret societies, there's a common denominator, which is Freemasonry. And at the highest levels of Freemasonry, the ideology that is Luciferian satanic worship. And by their own admittance, in some of the great philosophers of Freemasonry, Albert Pike, Manly P. Hall, they admit it themselves now in their esoteric writings. So when you come to understand that and overlay it against biblical prophecy, the Masonic writings openly admit that that the true secrets are revealed within Holy Scripture. Therefore, you get an understanding, and then in practical terms, you look at the immense complex web, which includes the Order of the Illuminati, the Health of Rothschild, the Bilderbergers, the United Nations, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Royal Institute of Affairs, the Fabian Socialist Societies, the Council of 13, the Skull and Bones Club. All of these complex webs, we're never going to get behind, because it's all secret. But that's what's ruling, that's what's moving us towards a one world government. And I'm afraid that the examples of 9/11 with its occult occurrence on that date, and 7/7, is simply, I believe, examples of the New World Order at work. And that whenever we have a terrorist incident, the next one, the first question we must ask is, well, who benefits? But this was probably more likely than not false flag. False flag has occurred all through the ages.
You mentioned Freemasonry, and obviously it's always been a known fact that Freemasonry is quite high within the police and justice system. So, did you ever come across any of that during your time working with the police? I know in 1997 it was actually ruled that they have to declare if they're members of Freemasonry. So I was just curious if you'd ever come across it in your work.
The answer was not especially. It wasn't, certainly not to me anyway. It wasn't apparent that there were. I was, my police force that I was in was influenced in any shape or form by Freemasonry. There might have been one or two individuals that might have thought, well, that's possibly the case, but by and large, we didn't really think about that, and I never really gave it an awful lot of thought in that sense. But I think there's a few things to say on that. We're not saying here that if you're a Freemason, you're a bad person. Most of the Freemasons who will, their understanding of Freemasonry will be a benevolent fund that does a society that does an awful lot of good in many areas, and that's quite true. However, at the top of the pyramid, at the top of the degrees, there is something sinister whereby the real ideology is then revealed, and that ideology is an evil ideology that worships Lucifer and Satan, and is secret, and the true colours are kept from those below. So it's a deliberate deception from the people who are Freemasons. They're not expected to know. They're not given the insight until they reach certain levels. So little wonder when you've got an organisation as putrid as that at the top, and that's a shame. And Freemasons need to be alerted to that very fact, because clearly there'll be people in that would be horrified if they knew that. And they probably don't know. But that's the problem when you've got secret societies. Everything's secret on a need-to-know basis, and nothing's open and transparent. And that's the government, I'm afraid, we're heading for.
That's what the court ruled in 1997.
Right.
Look, we can't have judges and police who who might have alliances elsewhere, we at least need that on the record. But I think Jack Straw overturned that in I'm not sure when it was, in the 2000s, but yeah, it was overturned again. So let's get back to your story, because we've kind of got ahead of ourselves. So you've become aware of all this information. You've got this strategic threat analysis to do. Did you go to anybody before you handed that in and say, look, I've come across this info, or did you just hand it in as it was? Or
no, the key date when I first put my head above the parapet was the 6th of July. Bear in mind, the assignment was due on the 8th of July. So what I did first, Keelan, was to flag it up with my Director of Intelligence with a briefing note, just identifying a few things I'd come across. That this is a bit of a red alert, highlighting that I'm in trouble here, in trouble with going along and producing one component part of the threat assessment, which would be the component part on terror. That meeting that I had, immediately my line manager wanted me to go to occupational health. So that wasn't helpful to me, because it was almost like a threat, a veiled threat.
So they were saying you were somehow ill, or
they wanted me checked out, just because, with some trepidation, and alerting them to a problem that really they felt distinctly uncomfortable with, and didn't really want to give any consideration to. I offered, obviously, to help them and provide whatever insight I had. But they simply weren't interested in that. The only thing they seemed interested in was to not rock the boat. So on the 7th of July 2010, which is 5 years to the day from 7/7, they wrapped me up in cotton socks here. The primary concern was that I had done all the work required of me to deliver the next day at the Intelligence Strategy Management Board. So they made sure I'd done the work, and I had. So I was in a position where I could have delivered to their satisfaction, because of the work I'd done in work's time. And that day I went along with that, believing that I was going to have to do this. I felt sick as I was contemplating it. But when I went home from work on the 7th of the 7th, that evening, tormented really, I thought, what on earth do we do here? And certainly some compelling scripture that I came across that evening, that was placed in front of me on a different matter, spoke to me, that says, Tony, you can't do this. You've got to tell the truth. You can't tell the lie. So that evening, I determined in my own mind, no matter what the consequences, I couldn't go along with it. So on the 8th of July, I went into work extra early. When the boss came in, the Director of Intelligence, I knocked on his door and handed over what was, instead of the control strategy and the strategic threat assessment matrix that he was expecting, was a simply ludicrous-looking version of a threat assessment matrix. This was there to shock and impress upon the Director of Intelligence that something was radically wrong here, and I couldn't go along with it. So yes, it would have been ludicrous looking. Basically, it contained a matrix with two areas on it, which was 9/11 truth and 7/7 truth, and other areas of criminality that we'd normally expect in that matrix were simply crossed out and scored as irrelevant. Such was my analysis of the nature of the threat. I wasn't going to, in a threat assessment, you look at the things that could harm you most. Terrorism is one. I simply wasn't going to permit that element to be misleading. And if they wouldn't allow me to put in the truth, they couldn't have anything at all. So I deliberately withheld all my information from management on that basis, which clearly got me into trouble. They asked me to explain myself in a written report, go home at that stage, send me home to write a report while they did an audit of my computer usage. I came back a few days later.
In case you've been looking at any
clearly, it was an actual
website.
Possibly that, but also they wanted to make sure that I was utilising my time correctly whilst at work, which I was, but I gleaned the alternative threat, through in my own time from home study. So I wasn't doing this fishing expedition of alternative threats whilst at work. I was using police information systems, but clearly, if we're only using police information systems, we're in a bit of a vicious circle. That if they're only allowing you to look at one thing and not encourage you to use open source information, then you're always going to only see what they want you to see. Well, I was bringing an extra layer, a layer that was freely available to any researcher who knows how to research the internet. So I was just bringing that extra dimension and overlaying it. And I felt justified in doing that because this was a threat assessment. This was a strategic threat assessment. So simply to try and restrict me to what's on the intelligence databases, to my mind, doesn't wash. There's something seriously wrong with the intelligence management, the national intelligence model process.
So it's obviously just a sort of trickle-down effect from whatever the intelligence services or government decide to put the parameters. You can only work within that.
And a word about the strategic threat assessment matrix. It was a very crude example of a strategic threat. It was too crude, in my opinion, and flawed in terms of a statistical probabilistic model. I was a long-term opponent, but I was perhaps a lone voice in 43 police principal intelligence analysts who we were well used to using these threat assessment matrices. I think they were a gimmick. They were a gimmick to almost like a mind control, to control the minds of principal analysts, to deflect from looking at wider issues that might question what really was the truth. This just vindicated that thought process. So, in my opinion, these products, a threat assessment matrix, is a massive distraction from actually allowing intelligence analysts to do the proper job, which is unearth what the real threats are.
And I definitely think it's interesting that they kind of hinted that you should go have some kind of medical evaluation or whatever, because recently I covered an interview that the BBC did, where they basically said if you believe in conspiracy theories like the Bilderberg Club, which they have their own website, so it's kind of obvious, or the alternative theories into 9/11, they basically said you may be mentally ill, but if you're not free to have your own thoughts, then what are you free to have, really?
Yeah, and one of the things I said to them, I'm simply not your spin doctor, I'm a principal analyst, and if you want me to be a spin doctor, then intelligence analysis is dead to the water.
Well, I know one of the hardest roadblocks for me is trying to educate, friends and family. A lot of people, whether they agree with you or not, you can chat with some, random people, and they might just agree with everything you say, but they don't want to go there. They don't want to take it on board because they're comfortable in their own bubble where the media cocoons them and the government tells them what's what. They don't have to think, so they don't choose to think. But, how is your family or friends reacted to your sort of newfound perspective on the world?
Much the same way over the course of the year. It's been very difficult to get people to tune in. I think J. Edgar Hoover put it well when he said the individual is handicapped by having to come to terms with a conspiracy so monstrous that he simply cannot believe it exists. I think that's what we're faced with here. It's a psychological problem. People can't believe it could happen, and therefore they simply cannot entertain that, and therefore the shutters come down. But that doesn't mean to say we give up. I think there needs to be an awareness of what's happening in the world and what's happening in our own governments. We need to be speaking and searching for the truth, and I think certainly analysts, intelligence analysts, have got a special job to play. But if they let themselves become spin doctors and have to pursue a narrow path, and instead of a national intelligence model, we have a national indoctrination model, and I think we've got to guard against that. Hopefully, by this stance, it's cost me my job, but word I'm sure we'll get round as to why I've lost my job.
Have you had any mainstream media interest at all?
Uh, well, basically, Keelan, I kept very quiet about this. When I got the sack, I did appeal, but I kept it close to my chest and put it into the employment tribunal eventually, and that's running its course now. But basically, I've come to the end of the road, and I had one or two options. Either throw in the towel because of the sheer cost of running an employment tribunal as complex as this. Simply, I'd used all my available resources and come to an end. So I was faced with the alternative of throwing in the towel, having made this stance and going out like a damp squib, or else trying to alert people to the problem in the hope of getting some sponsorship so that I could continue to fight an employment tribunal case of immense strategic importance, and one that could help the police service, I believe, however unpalatable some of the messages might be in the beginning. So I'm determined to try, if I can, to keep this employment tribunal case going to a natural conclusion, win or lose. And I don't much care, in one sense, which. I feel as though it's just in the public interest to have this case and this debate in court, and it may be a unique opportunity and a way of actually opening up and getting a more transparent governance of these issues. If that occurs through this particular case, it certainly is a massive case.
What is the scope of the tribunal? What sort of angle are you taking? What are they alleging that
right.
The dismissal process and whatnot? Just talk us through that.
Yeah, the dismissal occurred in September, on the 2nd of September, and it was a solemn occasion. There was no allegation of any misconduct whatsoever. I did actually end up going to occupational health and came back with a perfectly clean bill of health, so there was nothing there. The dismissal was simply because I held an incompatible belief with the role of a principal intelligence analyst, and that my position seemed to be too senior for any other consideration of redeployment. So it was dismissal. It was dismissal that was made amid some sadness. I mean, even the dismissing officer, the director of finance, who was a senior command team member, said it's a sad occasion for South Yorkshire Police. You've done some excellent work, and your beliefs could well indeed be correct, but I'm afraid it's not where we are today. So none of the senior managers have said that my beliefs about the New World Order, about 9/11, about 7/7 being false flag operations. They've not said that those beliefs are incorrect. They've just said that those beliefs are incompatible with where we are today. So it is with regret that they sacked me. It was almost as if they wanted to encourage me to appeal to the Police Authority Appeals Committee, and I did, but it didn't make any difference because I did get sacked. They upheld a decision to dismiss me and dismiss the appeal. But in going through the employment appeal procedure, it's a long drawn-out affair that I was told would take over a year, and it looks like going well beyond a year. At the moment, when I spoke to my solicitors, they looked at the case and immediately turned around and says there's two points of issues here. The first point of issue was that we may have an unfair dismissal, that the police were not necessarily reasonable to dismiss you in the circumstances. The second issue to be determined was whether my beliefs were protected under law, and the relevant employment legislation that was engaged was the employment brackets religious and belief clause brackets regulations from 2003. And if those beliefs that are held are protected, then we are facing not just an unfair dismissal potential, but a potential for discrimination too. And there's a 3-day hearing set aside for the 7th, 8th and 9th of September. That's the substantive hearing. But in the meantime, we've had a pre-hearing review, and that occurred on the 24th of May. And that pre-hearing review was to determine whether my beliefs were protected under the religious employment regulations from 2003, employment brackets religious belief regulations from 2003. Now, the judge determined at that point, after the hearing, the reasoning came out around about 4 weeks later, and the verdict, the judgment was such that my beliefs are not deemed to be protected. and it fell on one of the limbs, which was a limb of coherency and cogency. Now, my barrister has looked at the whole write-up of the reasoning of the judge, and concluded that there are arguable points of appeal here, because we feel that the judge has misdirected himself in looking at how he's applied the coherency cogency argument. He's applied it against the validity of my beliefs as opposed to the genuineness of my beliefs, which previous case law would direct you.
The Christian movement, surrounding the New World Order has been going on for a long time. A lot of Christians are, genuinely into that. So, I mean, I'm sure there's a case somewhere there.
Well, my beliefs. This is a complex case. The judge's verdict is available if people want to read it. But it was my beliefs were undoubtedly a combination of religious beliefs, philosophical beliefs, but also non-philosophical beliefs. And let me just distinguish between, say, what is definitely not a philosophical belief and what may be a philosophical belief. The belief that, for instance, the government have told lies on 9/11 and that the US government told lies on 9/11 is not a philosophical belief, and not a religious belief, right? That's something that you can get through data analysis. A belief, for instance, that the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq are immoral could be construed as a philosophical belief. A belief that the ascent of the New World Order with its satanic ideology and is something that's prophesied in end-time prophecy, is dependent on Scripture, Holy Scripture, and therefore that could be construed.
You could go around in circles with that all day, though, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So what the point is that it's massively complicated. So the judge has to unpick that and determine whether the essence of my beliefs were religious, philosophical, or non-philosophical. And as things stand at the moment, they have been deemed to be non-philosophical. But the point is, we can appeal on that, and my barrister has encouraged me to appeal, thinking there are certainly arguable points of appeal. And that appeal has to be launched by the 28th of July. And I think I've decided at the pre-hearing review, there was no interest because I had kept it close to my chest. Nobody knew about this. At the Employment Appeal Tribunal, when that hearing occurs, there'll be massive interest because I have taken steps now to alert people. And I did an interview that you may have seen that was first came out on the 8th of July. 2011, which was on Rich Planet, which was Richard D. Hall, and that was an interview telling the story. I've also done one or two radio broadcasts now, one on the Bristol show with Tony Gosling, and I've also appeared on the Alex Jones show for about half an hour talking about this. And as a result of that, the alternative media have embraced it and put it on many websites.
It's definitely blowing up. I mean, the traffic to the article, lots of people are Googling it. So
yeah. At the moment, though, as things stand, it hasn't appeared on any mainstream media. But that might we don't know whether that's going to stay like that or whether there'll be a breakthrough for mainstream media. In my own opinion is that it would be in the public interest if it was, because too many people are hidden from this, and that can't keep going for too much longer. It's unhealthy.
Have you contemplated maybe doing another sort of more detailed report? There's so many facts out there that you could outline. Maybe you could sort of approach the J7 Truth website, because they've got stacks of information, and they sent some of it to the inquest and the media. But I think maybe if somebody like you, who has been inside the establishment, so to speak, it might give that a bit more weight if you kind of got together and did something. I know there's people like Annie Mashon, who I mentioned earlier, who's former MI5, so she has some weight, and people like Dr. Nafis Ahmed, who wrote pretty much the first critical, sort of sourced book on 7/7. So I think if everyone kind of came together, we could get some kind of mainstream media coverage if we all put our heads together.
Well, that's right. But I also felt I mean, yes, I would like to do put my own analysis out, and I will have a website out shortly that I'm working on that tracks the case and explains what's happening and explains where I've come from with all of this. But there are other things that I think are important too, and I think it's important and a unique opportunity. This employment appeal, this employment case. To actually open up the debate on 7/7 in a way that would not be available by other means. It's bizarre, really, but I do think it's one way. And I actually believe, I'm not sure what the South Yorkshire Police's game plan was, because, quite frankly, they had options. They didn't need to sack me for making this stance. No. They could have offered me alternative redeployment. They didn't. They actually risked this going into an employment tribunal. I don't know whether they wanted that or whether they've just been surprised by the very fact that they've been fighting this case to the degree to which I have. Has that caught them by surprise? One of the things that was said to me in a one-on-one very early on, and it was a cryptic message saying, Tony, you could be immensely useful to the police service. But then in the next breath, they go and sack me without any questions asked.
How did that message come about? Who?
In a one-to-one with the Director of Intelligence, we were mulling over and being philosophical about the stance I was making, and a number of things were said here that, Tony, you and I will never get them to tell the truth. And this is the Director of Intelligence telling me this. And Tony, you could be useful for the police service. I wish I'd have asked at that time, in what way. But the next, I'm taken away from the office, and the next time I'm in front of a disciplinary hearing 2 or 3 months down the line. So you reflect on those conversations and mull over them and thinking, what did they mean at the time? And maybe me doing this, putting it into an employment tribunal, may indeed help the police service raise the issue and help the police service to come to terms with something that, in a way, is unpalatable. But somebody has to. There's got to be pain to get behind this. There's got to be pain, hasn't there? Somebody has got to stick the head above the parapet, and there's going to be some grief.
Perhaps there's people, inside the police force then that want to do the right thing but don't want to come out themselves. So in this way, they can get it out without sort of, you say, putting their head on the line.
I mean, that's one way of looking at it. I might be totally off the beaten track there, Keelan, but I'd put that probability assessment of about 50% that, there are good people clearly in South Yorkshire Police. I put them in a terrible position. I make no apologies for that. It was going to be difficult. What would they do in that situation? And maybe I've been told by the chaplain, who I still have contact with, that they only did what was practical. Well, I only did what was right and proper, as far as I was concerned. And obviously appealing, I think it was in the public interest to appeal. And I hope by the very fact that I have appealed, I do help the police service. There might be grief in the beginning, but ultimately, if the police service need to reflect on this, and senior managers in the police need to look at this. How many people have looked at your video, your new one that's out, the big lie, 7/7, big picture rather? How many people have looked at Seeds of Deconstruction? How many people have looked at the analysis that's now available on the web post Lady Justice Hallett's inquiry? And if they look at all of that combined, and if they look at 9/11 and all the analysis that discredits the official narrative of that too, then surely these people can no longer hide behind what's happening, and that there will be pressure, and there may be a tipping point, and the tipping point might well come from within the police service itself, that puts itself its own problems to rights. But it's going to take some brave people. Hopefully, by doing this, people will follow suit. I think analysts need to be alert to it. I think certain things I would recommend for the intelligence analysis profession in law enforcement is that as they're being trained up, they sit down and made to watch your excellent video on 7/7, the big picture, and the way you take a very measured approach to the analysis. You know, and I congratulate on you that. But that's something that analysts could do well to actually look at as a.
Is there
as
some kind of you know, like a worldwide analyst conference every year, or something where
Certainly,
you can go and raise this with everybody, perhaps?
well, within the when I was within the force, there was certainly a Principal Intelligence Analyst network, and there are other sort of forums that across the world, analytical forums and websites that you can feed into. As this case has unfolded, I've chosen not to do that yet. But maybe now that my issue, my case, is out in the open, and he's not likely to die down just yet, then maybe the time has come when I do actually feed in my input to these forums. I think there's a lot of learning lessons to be had from my experience, and I think there's a lot of reflection for the police service, but also not just the police service, the government in general. And if this case exerts pressure on them, then all well and good. But I'd like them to turn attention to analysis that's far superior to mine, and that's the documentaries that have been made on this that are excellent, and we can't keep sort of dismissing those. They raise some serious questions, and we can't keep blocking those questions out. It's not right in our free society.
Absolutely. So you've got a hearing coming up. Is that open to the public? Can people go and show their support? And
yeah, I mean, the problem with an employment tribunal court is that it's very much limited in numbers. So there's only room for about 20 in an employment tribunal courtroom. So now that this is out in the open, there'll be far more. I would anticipate far more people than 20 wanting to come and listen to this case. I think particularly if the Employment Appeal Tribunal is heard, which will be about my beliefs on the New World Order and 7/7 and 9/11, which will be of great public interest. Less public interest will be a debate whether it was unfairly dismissed, which simply will be whether I could have been redeployed somewhere else, or whether the processes they dismissed me were correct and reasonable in the circumstances, which carries no global interest at all. But certainly any debate on the wider issues of strategic threat and my beliefs carry immense interest. And the judge clearly, in looking at the test for the belief, only failed me on one, and certainly said the beliefs are massive in terms of what they mean to a free and democratic society. That's the situation we're in. We haven't got a date for the appeal tribunal, the Employment Appeal Tribunal. That is likely to come between when I appeal, which will be the 28th of July, and sometime before the 6th, 7th, and 8th. Sorry, the 7th, 8th, and 9th of September. And of course, if we do have an interim hearing, it's likely that the 3-day hearing in September may be put back. Because we won't know until that appeal hearing's finished whether it's just an unfair dismissal claim or whether it's an unfair dismissal and a discrimination claim.
Well, even if there's not room inside the building, I mean, people can come and congregate outside or whatever, and that might even help get more publicity. I know Ian Puddick had a guy named Ian Puddick recently had a big trial where he was the victim of all sorts of police excessiveness, and there was sort of a free speech trial, and lots of people came out and supported him. So I think you could get the same kind of reaction.
One of the things, Keelan, that's happened since I went public, which was on the 8th of July, so we're only talking just over a week. I've had such a phenomenal response, and the emails that have been on the websites and the messages that have been passed back to me. I've simply been overwhelmed, with that kind of response. I mean, not every single response has been for what I've done, but I feel quite humble and honoured to have that kind of backing. And people do want, there's a body now that are trying to rally behind me, recognising the body in the truth movement, recognising the potential strategic importance of this employment tribunal case, and in that sense, they want to find the means to support me so I can continue it through to a natural conclusion, win or lose, and that much I'm prepared to do. So it's that's an interesting development, and one that has happened far more quickly than I anticipated. So the response has been absolutely fantastic.
Well, awareness is definitely growing. Just in my short few years of, I don't like to use the term being awake, but knowing about this alternative information, there's definitely been an increase in awareness, and there are people out there ready to do what needs to be done. At the same time, the elite are pushing forward their plan at a record speed. They're trying to close the book on this whole Al Qaeda thing with the supposed death of Bin Laden and all that kind of thing. It's almost like there's a divide now of people that have been so boxed into the mainstream paradigm, and those
That's
that
right.
see what's really going on. But yeah, the awareness is definitely increasing, I think.
Yeah, but it's simply not increasing fast enough at this stage, and that's why it's so important to keep up the pressure. We need open and transparent government for it to be healthy. We can't be moving towards a fascist state without resisting. I often thought as a lad, how on earth did the Nazis grow to, the German people allow the Nazis to grow to what they became as a Third Reich? And you can look back now and you think the mind control that's within this new world order, you can suddenly see how it happened. And that's the danger, that what we've got here, I believe, is a new world order movement that's putrid, and that the real hidden agenda is, and we've not touched on it, but it really is horrific, and people are simply dumb to that. Most people, they may be alert to the possibility that the government have lied on 9/11 and 7/7, but the wider threat that's there, I still don't think most people are alert to. Most people are tuned into the normal media, the normal routine, and that is hidden from them.
Well,
That's the big danger.
There's almost so much information that the average person can't even, they don't even want to go through it all. They may hear, Iraq was a lie, fair enough. Yeah. They may hear this or that, and then they fall back into their same daily routine. But this really is an all, encompassing thing that's been going on for a very long time. And, it's just getting closer and closer to the way they planned it to be, global government. So,
and that's why I think your role, the kind of role that you've got is so important, and the kind of position I'm in is so important, that it's a battle for information and minds, and we're losing the information war at the moment, but we've not lost it, and that information needs to be put out, one, deeply into the alternative media, and ultimately I cannot believe that we will not break through into mainstream media, particularly as they're experiencing so many problems at the moment. Only this week, we don't need to mention those, but I think there's a tipping point, and I think we're close to that. I think they're closer with 9/11, I think, than they are in the UK, but I think it's going to be easier to tip in the United Kingdom than it is in the United States of America. So I think that the 7/7 case and your documentary and others are so important, and I do believe that it won't be too long before the government have to back down in some shape or form. I cannot believe that they can go on blanking it out, and it's important that pressure groups and truth movements keep up the good work that they've been doing, and hopefully if this helps in some way, then my dismissal and the harm it's done to me will be well worth it.
Well, on that note, that's pretty much all the time we've got. I want to thank you again for coming on the show and for having the courage to stand up for your beliefs, even though it cost you a great deal. So yeah, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story with us.
My pleasure, Keelan. Thanks very much indeed.
Terrorism strikes again. the suspect gets the blame. Responsibility is claimed, but nothing's what it seems. There's not a scrap of proof around. Instigator can't be found. None of us is safe and sound, cause nothing's what it seems. Yeah, nothing's what it seems to me, or what it may appear to be. This is my reality, and nothing's what it seems.